Okay.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. It is Tuesday, April 30th, and my name is Eric Wolf, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of the World Food Travel Association. And I am really delighted to introduce you today to John Mulcahy from Ireland. I've known John for quite a long time, and I consider him a friend now. He puts up with me a lot, and he's a fantastic person. He's also got some tremendous experience in our gastronomy tourism industry. He used to be in charge of the culinary tourism initiatives that fell to Ireland, and is just he's a wealth of information. Super all around nice guy. And today he's going to be talking about how culinary heritage changes over time. And uh, I've heard some of the things he's going to talk about before, and I think it's going to open a lot of your eyes. And I look forward to the new information as well. So, John, without further ado, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Eric, and great to see you again. And thank you for all those wonderful comments. Yeah, this talk really is goes back to one of your workshops in a food tourism workshop in Greece in 2018, where I was talking about the history of gastronomy tourism in Europe, and really this is and extending it out a little bit more and explaining where where some of this came from. Um, so, Contrary to popular perception, and its link with tourism is not a 20th century phenomenon. Food has always been one of the most effective ways to communicate with and begin to understand the other and their culture. Sorry, Eric, will I stop here? Or?
What's the question?
Sorry, there's somebody's mic is on and it's coming in
Yeah,
over me.
I've stopped it. Sorry about that, John.
Okay, no problem. Anyway, it's about understanding the other and their culture. So food was the principal benchmark to assess the difference between them and us. And this difference related to some sort of ethnic, national, or religious characteristic, and how it reflected people's social and cultural values. Simple examples of these characteristics would be like the Jewish or Muslim communities not eating pork, or Catholics not eating fish on Fridays, or the Moroccan habit of eating sweet pastries with soup, or Italians and pasta, or Spaniards and tapas, or Ireland and potatoes. So in effect, food sometimes broke down the barriers that exist between different cultures, ethnicities, and geographies, thus encouraging travel and tourism. But how? Historically, little is known about tourists' food. Originally, they, usually those with resources, may have taken some of their food with them and the people to prepare it, but the supplies were unlikely to last more than a few days, so they relied on the hospitality of others during the journey or at their destination. Some rulers encouraged this. Over 4,000 years ago, the caravan routes in Sumeria, which is now southern Iraq, had networks of inns for travelers, according to Michael Simmons, who wrote the 1998 book, The Pudding That Took 1,000 Cooks. Now, we can see this in travel accounts. For example, in the 4th century BC, Archestratus, the most obvious self-confessed gastrotourist, he was a poet, born in Italy, liked fish. In 1548 in Italy, a gentleman called Hortensio Lando suggested a food tour of Italy, traveling from Sicily north to the Alps. In the 1600s and 1700s, English aristocrats on their European grand tour wrote letters describing the foods that they ate, and they made their opinions known about that. In 1789 in France, a writer wrote of the foods he encountered during his travels in the French Pyrenees, and that's just one of about 157 French travel accounts at the time. In 1801 in America, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of America, recommends French wine and food following a request for travel advice from two wealthy Americans. And this is just if you like, in the Western side of the planet. There are numerous writers from Morocco, China, the Middle East, and elsewhere also writing about these things. So it appears nothing has changed. Food was then, and still is now, perceived as a means of enriching experiences, expressing and exploring difference, and adding to a quality of life. Now, one of the many reasons for travel was also food itself. Groups searching for new and tradable foods, such as spices, which had great economic value. That suggests a different kind of travel, certainly not tourism. And we'll look at that in a moment. Over the past 50 years, globalization has increased interest in and focus on regional identities and the roots of heritage and culture. And this attraction, allied to huge tourism growth, has meant that every region, destination, and country wants to capitalize on culinary heritage. But we are treating it a bit like the fish in the photograph. It's frozen in place, unmoving, not dynamic. In my 20 years of food tourism experience, I have seen governments, businesses, and others rush to make the most of this tourism opportunity of culinary heritage, mostly to get the experience out there. But not enough time is being taken to identify and understand the story behind their offering. There are usually three reasons for this. First, food tourism operators are generally entrepreneurs trying to survive in business, but they're not historians, anthropologists, or folklorists, or even storytellers beyond making marketing taglines. Second, the stories behind cuisines are not known by many, and they are not widely shared, largely because they're not exceptional to them. They are to their visitors, but not to them. Third, the stories that are used are not aligned with what either operators or visitors want or need in terms of value and outcomes. So I think what's happening is that people or destination management companies or whoever is in the food tourism business are either romanticizing the past or embracing the present. And by romanticizing the past, I mean that they regard the past as unchanged practices over time. The good old days when you got real food and it was from local farms and you baked your own bread and so on. And it reinforces cultural and national stereotypes, what's considered to be traditional cuisine, in inverted commas. And so, but I'll come back to what is traditional cuisine in some cases. On the other hand, some places are embracing the present, stories and values which acknowledge change and new influences, perhaps through immigration. It adapts to changing ingredients, either because of globalization or increasingly because of climate change. And that, I suppose, could be known as fusion food or fusion cuisine. But each of these ignores these questions. What heritage are you looking at or drawing from? Haven't cuisines evolved? And what has been forgotten, sometimes purposely, and why? Recipes get forgotten, methods get forgotten. In 2005, Stephen Mennell, a sociology professor at University College Dublin, explained that the evolution of gastronomy acts as a highly sensitive marker for much broader social, political, and economic changes in society. So we should stop and think, are there other stories being ignored? Is there another side to culinary heritage and the development of a cuisine? We tend to see cuisine as something fixed or stereotyped idea of what that should look like. Think French cuisine, Italians, Chinese, Indian, but Australian, Irish, British. Generally, they're not considered to have as cuisine. Or to put it another way, why do we have the culinary heritage and cuisines that we have in our own countries? Have cuisines evolved? How and why? What are evolving cuisines telling us? Is an evolved cuisine an authentic one? We will see that it all depends on who is telling the story. in that case. To interrogate these questions, I always go back to this article in 2001 by Rachel Loudon, an Englishwoman who lived in Mexico and is now in America, I think. But this was a fabulous article where she basically advocated that all of this good old days stuff ignored all of the dangers that were involved in providing food for yourself every day. And in fact, what the modern person now, what she called culinary modernism, had provided what was wanted. Food that was processed, preservable, industrial, novel, fast, that everyone could afford. Pre-modern times, food wasn't processed in the way that it is now. It was hard to preserve because the techniques weren't generally available. It was not at an industrial level. It was basically whatever was being produced in a house somewhere. It was not novel. It was the same food every day, day in, day out, and entirely dependent on what you were able to grow or pull together. It certainly wasn't fast in that it took you all day to make it. And the food of the elite was there because the elite had plenty of people to spend all their day making this food for them. So Rachel then asked, on the basis of this, she asked the question, well, how long does it take to create a cuisine? And in her judgment, less than 50 years, judging by past experience. So suggests that a new cuisine appears within 50 years, or the existing cuisines evolve on a 50-year rotation, roughly. Now, if you want to find out more about this, then I suggest you look at Rachel's book, which developed these ideas that were in her article, Cuisine and Empire, which she expanded on in 2013. And it turns out the answers to our questions come because of the involuntary and voluntary discovery in inverted commas, of other foods. Culinary heritage and cuisine are a product of a wide range of influences. So, influences such as war. Now, that might be an unpleasant idea, but when you think about it, war involves invading forces arriving somewhere else and seeking familiar food. The ordinary soldier wants the food that he used to have at home, but it might not be available. This required improved technology in feeding armies, whether it was through canning or preserving or whatever it was, or simply in some cases, the army taking whatever they could find in ingredients in the land that they found themselves in. But war also involved families sending food parcels and packages to their men in the war zone. And it involved returning soldiers familiar with a wider range of foods than before, and then coming home and seeking to continue their military eating experiences. For example, British Empire soldiers coming home and wanting to continue having curries and spicy food that they had experienced in India. And that's taking it at a very simplistic level. What about disaster? Disaster is a force capable of penetrating cultural barriers and internationalizing food, because fires, floods, storms, hurricanes, droughts, tsunamis means that aid has to come from somewhere else with strange food, or simply the food that you depend on is gone and you need to find something else urgently just to stay alive. So cuisine changes as a result. Famine, something that we in Ireland are really familiar with. But famine in Ireland meant that our people accepted a food which they might otherwise reject. Cornmeal or maize meal was imported into Ireland during the Great Famine of 1845 to 1850. Only problem was nobody knew how to cook it, and they certainly didn't know what to do with it. At the same time, famines mean that people who are over-dependent on food, like we were on potatoes, they then begin to eat local strange food. And in Ireland's case, that became shellfish and foods found in the fields, foraging. Another important discovery of other food is imposed, I suppose, or involuntary, through imperialism and colonization. And there's a huge story of that in Rachel Loudon's book, Cuisine and Empire. And you can, off the top of your head, Islamic influence in Spain in the Middle Ages, Spain and Portugal in the Americas, the Ottoman Empire in Southeast Europe, Germany in Africa, Britain in India and Pakistan. You could go on and on. And they brought their food, their armies brought their influence to those places and then brought them home again. Immigration and emigration, I suppose immigration is a hot topic these days, but migration, whether it's coming or going, both forced and voluntary, like political, either because of politics or economic reasons, create huge diasporas. And in places where long-term migration is taking place, like Ireland, South America, and the Philippines, migration has meant substantial traffic of food parcels in both directions, influencing the evolution of cuisines. I forget the name that they use for the Philippines. I think it's a Balikon box, and somebody might correct me on that. But the outcome is the same. You've new ingredients traveling from one place to another, which is affecting or is changing the cuisine of the people that are using them. Exile I make a distinction between migration and exile. Exile could be forced, such as slavery, and another type of exile is religious persecution, such as the Huguenots in France. But again, that would change the cuisine of those people. And discovery of other food through pilgrimage, whether it's the Muslim Hajj in Saudi Arabia or the Sikh culture going to Amritsar in India, Rome for Catholics, Jerusalem for Muslims, Jews, and several Christian faiths, the various communals around Europe. And in all of those cases, when they travel, they experience the food of the people that are also doing the pilgrimage, but also the food of where they are. And so, and in turn, participants returning home bring home new ideas, new tastes, challenging the status quo. Over and beyond that, though, there is also what's known as cultural magnetism. This is where a more intangible force, where communities the foodways of cultures of superior prestige. And there's obvious historical examples. For example, the global hegemony of French gastronomy. Certainly during the 19th and 20th centuries, the only cuisine worth having were French dishes. Menus were in French, whether it was in America or in Hong Kong or in Australia. Dishes, you were using menu French. And Julia Child in the US made a career out of that. A contemporary example might be New Nordic Food, where everybody was looking up to what the Nordics were doing with food. Another type is gastronomic counter-colonization. You might say, oh, golly, what is that? Well, that's where both returnees and migrants from the colonies have added to the gastronomy of the colonizer in post-colonial area. So, for example, the most obvious example is Indian and Pakistani food in England. 80 years later, those migrants and those returnees from the Indian subcontinent have substantially changed the cuisine that you're now offered in England. The same with Vietnamese food in France and Indonesian food in Holland. So clearly there's pressure on cuisines, continuous pressure on cuisines and on culinary heritage. And it means that the heritage and cuisines are adapting to not only immigration and emigration, national and personal economics, changes in population, taste, fashions, but also changes in climate, government policy, and others. So food, cuisine, and culture is not an island. It's not separated from everything else. It's an integral part of everything else. So what effect does this have on a destination and on a country? And so I'm going to go to Ireland because this is the place that I know best. And so I would suggest that of all those examples of forces that affect cuisine and culinary heritage, most countries, regions, and destinations have experienced several of these forces on their cuisine. So what is Ireland's culinary heritage? Well, I suppose first, just to highlight where we are, this is Ireland here. It's Europe, is all this area, France and Spain. Here's Ireland on the edge of the pond, which is the Atlantic, and the far side is America. And I've taken a picture of, I'll use a satellite picture here to try and highlight what I'm talking about. Our culinary heritage is always reflective of the culinary changes as a result of immigration, as it is known now, or as invasions and plantations historically. Towns in Ireland were usually the products of this. Vikings in the 9th and 10th century came to Dublin and to Waterford. In the 12th century, Normans came to Wexford. In the 16th century, English plantations occurred in Munster. You can see them here on this map. These are the plantations in the 1500s and 1600s. In the 17th century, Scottish planters took over a large part of Ulster. Did I say the Spanish in Galway? The Spanish came to Galway in the 16th century. The French came to Sligo in the 18th century. But essentially, we were an English colony for 800 years. In the 19th century, we suffered the Great Famine. People were eating to survive, not to enjoy. 10 million emigrants from Ireland over that century to North America, Canada, Britain, Argentina, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, creating a huge diaspora. And all this reflects what is a continuous theme in the Irish gastronomic tradition, a diversity which accommodated and cross-pollinated culinary practices. You have to look for them, but they are there, they're hidden. But if you don't know what you're looking for, well, then if you're not aware of this history, then it's hard to see them. Irish food has been and is a marker of how food quietly influences and includes everything from, many of the Anglo-Irish, let's call them the invaders or the occupiers, if you want, embarked on the Grand Tour, learning to enjoy foreign food and cooking for and looking for it on their return. Tastes were brought home from British Empire by anyone who joined the various Irish regiments and the colonial administrations in the 19th century. For example, between 1855 and 1863, nearly a quarter of the Indian civil service recruits in the British Empire came from Irish universities, while in 1830, 42% of the British Army in the Empire, 42 of these British Army recruits were Irish-born as the British Empire embarked on expansion. So clearly, all these guys coming home had a significant effect on what ingredients became available and what people wanted to eat. In the 19th and 20th century, Ireland, being what was then a very religious country, we had many religious missionary orders or groups of priests that would leave Ireland and create missions, religious missions around the world. One group, if I can just diverge for a second, I worked with a group who are based here in Ireland now, and a lot of them had left 40 years ago to go work in Korea and China. They left as 17, 18, 20-year-olds, and they went to Korea and China and worked with the people there. Inevitably, they their diets, their cuisine, they forgot about what they were eating in Ireland, and they became a fan of Korea and Chinese foods because that's what the people that they were servicing needed or ate. The problem occurred when they were forced to retire, and they were forced to come home and come to a religious old age home here in Ireland. But where I was involved was that the catering operation was serving them bacon and cabbage, Irish stew, trifle, jelly and ice cream. These guys hadn't eaten this stuff for 40 years and were not in the least bit interested in it. So we had to find a way of catering for their new tastes, which meant we had to have a kitchen that was familiar with Korean dishes and Chinese dishes. The fun part of this is all of these priests who were in their 70s and 80s were dressed like me in a jumper, old men. And I went out one day with them to, they decided to, some of them brought me to a Chinese restaurant. And I wasn't prepared for what I should have thought of what was going to happen, but I wasn't prepared for it. We went into the Chinese restaurant, and obviously the Chinese waiter came over expecting the stereotypical, I'll have a number 2 and a number 6 and fried rice and so on. Instead, these guys spoke fluent Mandarin and ordered dishes that weren't on the menu. The face on the waiter was classic. He just didn't understand what was happening, but they served what the guys were looking for, and the guys know where all the best Chinese restaurants are in Ireland now because they know exactly what they're getting. Anyway, I've diverged from what I was talking about. The return of the Irish famine diaspora, especially women from North America, Britain, and Australia to ordinary homes on farms and housing estates, also made a difference. These were known as Bridgets, the name Bridget, especially in America. And Bridgets ran rich people's houses in New York and Boston. And Bridgets came home with ideas, recipes, and money, looking for a husband and a means to settle down. That changed some of our cuisine. But our culinary heritage stories are post-famine, Catholic, Republican, reflecting a new young country. We're only 100 years old as a country. And it largely ignores other aspects of our culinary heritage, which should involve the Protestant side of the country, the Unionist side of the country, the Scottish side of the country, the French influences, the Spanish influences, and so on. It's a form, I suppose, of gastro-nationalism or gastro-patriotism, perhaps. To the rest of the world, the Irish stereotype is potatoes, whiskey, Irish stew, and for some reason, fish and chips. Eric and I did some work through the WFTA. I think it was around 2016, Eric, but there was 6 or 8 countries where we did a survey, and what came back from the survey is that somehow we were regarded, our typical dish in Ireland was fish and chips. I think it's because we were mixed up with Britain, but I'm not sure. But the reality of the Irish stereotype is very different when you are in Ireland. Yet we continue to romanticize a particular past. But that is changing. This is Myrtle Allen. Myrtle Allen only died in 2018. She's one of our iconic gastronomic people in Ireland. She set up Ballymaloe House, County Cork. And in Ballymaloe, she also set up the Ballymaloe Cookery School in 1983. And at that opening, she made a speech. And it's interesting what she said. I'm going to read this because it kind of indicates the sort of things we should be considering. I don't mean to be insular as to say that the food of other countries is not marvelous, but I do say that food, climate, and people go together. When we talk about an Irish identity in food, we have a thing, but we must also remember that we belong to a geographical and culinary group with Wales, England, and Scotland, and we share their traditions as all countries share their traditions with their next door neighbour. Of course, one must also say many recipes from France, particularly northern France, are wonderful when they are made over here. The recipes adapt to our food, just as their climate is similar to our climate. It may seem funny, for instance, that if you make hollandaise sauce with Irish butter and eggs, you get a different sort of hollandaise sauce than if you make it with French butter and eggs. I'm sure that it is the butter that is different, not the eggs. So this, in its own way, gives us a distinction and an identity. It is different, but just as good. And what Myrtle is saying here clearly is, well, she's acknowledging the French dominance of that I was talking about earlier. But she's very diplomatic, suggesting that actually, because you're using Irish ingredients and you're having it in Ireland, then it's a different dish. And I think we need to remember that and tell that story. So going back to Rachel Loudon, what she highlights, though, is that when lands were conquered and people migrated and populations converted to different religions or accepted new dietary theories, or where dishes or even whole cuisines were forgotten and new ones were invented. She asks the question, is where now is the cuisine of Renaissance Spain and Italy, or of the Indian Raj, or of Tsarist Russia, or of medieval Japan? Instead, she says, we have Nanya food in Singapore, Cape Malay food in South Africa, Creole food in the Mississippi Delta, and local food in Hawaii. And she says these are all new cuisines that have evolved in the recent past and continue to evolve. Oh, forgot about the local food. So she also makes the case that most traditional foods are actually not that old. And we never question this. When somebody says it's traditional, well, just how traditional is it? And of course, as I said earlier, food doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's affected by all of the other things that are going on around it. So generally, traditional foods have tended to be, they were created after industrialization and urbanization. So English fish and chips, it dates from the late 19th century when the working class took up the fried fish of Sephardic Jewish immigrants in East London. Balti and beer. Balti is a kind of stir-fried curry dreamed up by Pakistanis living in Birmingham, UK, trying to make a business that they could sell. The French baguette, it's a 20th century phenomenon adopted nationwide only after World War II. Greek moussaka, created in the early 20th century in an attempt to Frenchify Greek food. The bubbling Russian samovar, late 18th century. The Risjan, the Indonesian rishtavel, Dutch colonial food. The Indonesian pandang food, invented for the tourist market in the past 50 years. Tequila, promoted as the national drink of Mexico during the 1930s by the Mexican film industry. Indian tandoori chicken, the brainchild of Hindu Punjabis who survived by selling chicken cooked in a Muslim-style tandoor oven when they fled Pakistan for Delhi during the partition of India. The lomi lomi salmon in Hawaii, salmon rubbed with chopped tomatoes and spring onions that is a fixture in every Hawaiian luau. Not a salmon is to be found within 2,000 miles of the islands, and onions and tomatoes were unknown in Hawaii until the 19th century. And also perhaps soy sauce, steamed white rice, sushi, and tempura of Japan, commonly eaten only after the middle of the 19th century. So it's clear that when we talk about traditional foods, well, just how traditional are we talking about? And it goes back to this idea that we're grabbing on stuff to tell a story, to promote our product in our locality without sufficiently considering exactly the the authenticity of what we're talking about. I'm going to take a kind of left turn here, and I want to illustrate another form of a culinary heritage being used, it's being linked with empire instead of tourism. Penn Vogler recently wrote a book called Stuffed, and in that she takes different iconic foods and writes about them in terms of exactly where they came from and how they evolved in a particular way. And so here, she describes how after World War One, this by the way is a plum pudding, and this represents all the various places where the ingredients of the plum pudding has come from one side, parts of the empire into London and the center of the empire. After World War One, Penn Vogler explains that Britain's empire had to navigate falling exports, growing global recession, war debt, and falling employment, social unrest at home, and growing economic competition from the US, Japan, and other protectionist nations. The British came up with a solution to boost the appeal of homegrown and empire-produced goods, such as Empire Day, Empire Shopping Week, and the British Empire Exhibition in 1924. They also set up the Empire Marketing Board, which set out to boost the economies of the countries that not only were Britain's best customers, but also its suppliers, and also the countries that they had colonized. And rather than glossing over Britain's reliance on the rest of the world, it celebrated it. So they took the Christmas plum pudding and made it the nation's culinary symbol. Ingredients from all over the empire were bound together in this culinary symbol to make something rich, shaped like the globe and British. There was circularity too in the pudding's form and formidable keeping properties, which meant it could be sent back to the colonialists. So this particular British celebration of Christmas helped to keep the spirit of the empire alive in its servants. And in the book, she provides on page 172, she provides the back of a recipe card, which everybody could write in to the marketing board and get the recipe for the Empire Christmas pudding, and got the king to sign off on it. And you can see all the different ingredients and where they came from in the British Empire. I think we got the eggs. The Irish got the eggs, and the beer apparently could come from anywhere around this location. As Vogler points out, if you remove the non-British ingredients from the King's Empire Christmas pudding, we would be left with apple dumplings and a pint of beer, which is so my final thoughts. I hope to have shown you that there is an opportunity to capitalize on culinary heritage assets that perhaps we didn't know we had. I hope that some of what I've talked about has encouraged you to consider how culinary heritage is critical to your business, your locality, and your local people. So, you know, and a fundamental bit, and I'm drawing from a local lady here, Tino Dwyer, who runs the tourism space in County Clare in Ireland. And she says more visitors is an old measure of tourism success. Instead, focus should be on a different kind of more value for local businesses, more value for residents, more value for visitors, and more value for the place itself. And guess what? Food does that. So the culinary heritage of every destination has a unique asset, is a unique asset that should be a set of stories that are not easily replicated. Culinary heritage links with tourism depends on and draws from knowing what that heritage is, all of it, good and bad. As a heritage asset, cuisine is a revenue driver where visitors attach value to stories, to dishes using local ingredients, and to the embedded authenticity that comes with that. If the time is taken to elicit the true stories behind the place, the food, and the people, then each story will have authenticity and integrity. And they are two defining features of successful food tourism destinations. And finally, remember, your ordinary is a visitor's extraordinary. Thank you. And as a last point, I'd just push, there's a new book coming out in May, Irish Food History, a Companion, and I have a chapter in it. Check it out. It'll be published in print in May, and it's a pretty good read. So that's an undisguised push for myself. That's it, Eric. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. As always, fascinating. It's like listening to stories before bedtime. It's all these, you bring up all these images of the British Empire of yesteryear and traversing the world in the search for the perfect plum pudding or the next ingredient to add to something. So while people are thinking about questions to ask you, I have a question that I think a lot of people have thought about, and it also came up in session 4 yesterday. So if we look at distributors, import and export, travel, and people are pretty familiar with most major cuisines in the world. And it's pretty easy to find some rendition of the major cuisines anywhere you go in the world. So in this era of globalization, how can destinations maintain their own identities? And do you think that maybe in 100 years or 250 years, that with all the fusion coming together, it will just be one world cuisine?
Not at all. I don't. I think. Yes, I agree that you'll get. Look, you can get Irish stew in an Irish pub anywhere around the world, but the problem is that the Irish stew is using ingredients that are maybe not authentic. They're using beef instead of lamb. They're using, there's a phobia here in Ireland that you're not allowed to put carrots. There's always an argument about putting carrots in an Irish stew.
Don't do it.
Absolutely forbidden. Don't do it.
Oh, okay. All right.
But there are those that say, of course you should have carrots in an Irish stew. So I think it comes down to, we've got to remember, it's not just the dish, Irish stew. It's about the ingredients and consuming that in you cannot replicate the atmosphere. You cannot replicate the climate. You cannot replicate the noise and the sounds and the smells. Somebody talked about that yesterday. I think it was the guy from Sweden was talking about, the five senses come into play when you're eating your food. And we shouldn't downplay that or ignore that. That's why having an Irish stew in an Irish pub on the west of Ireland cannot be replicated anywhere else, because you're surrounded by Irish people, you're surrounded by Irish atmosphere, and so it all adds to the dish. And so I don't think we'll end up with a sea of sameness. We'll find ways of individualizing that. And what I'm fascinated with here in Ireland is, for example, in Ireland over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe 10 years, we've had huge numbers of Eastern Europeans and especially Ukrainians coming into Ireland. And their take on Irish food and Irish ingredients and twisting it a little bit to come up with new kind of food, which is still recognizably Irish, but using perhaps Eastern European methodologies or presentation. It's exciting. You're seeing a new version of Irish food.
Can you give us an example of what the Ukrainians are doing to change Irish food?
Their breads, how they're using, how they I can't think of one off the top of my head, but certainly their breads, their pickles, how they use the pickles and integrate them into dishes, that sort of thing. I'm sorry. I should have I should have anticipated that, but I can't answer it directly.
No, I mean, that's what we do when we have Q&A. We put people on the spot, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, we have a question here. Is there a resource that can help us delve into these issues further? And any work you have authored, we could read that addresses these issues. So basically, I think we're looking for resources that can talk about culinary evolution and that can help us to understand it on a deeper level.
Um, well, my LinkedIn has a list of all of my publications, and I had my LinkedIn address up there a few minutes ago. There it is in the bottom right hand side, linkedin.com in gastronomy. And I think if you go to one that I did was the history of gastronomy and the evolution of gastronomy, and that was in a book which was published. But if people contact me directly, I'm more than happy to share a PDF of some of my stuff. But as a starting point, I would go back to that book to think about Rachel Loudon's book, Empire and Cuisine and Empire. That's a fabulous book, and it opens up your mind in all sorts of ways. I only skimmed over the surface of what she talks about there. So they're two sources I would suggest.
Okay. Well, I also asked AI while we were talking, and
Oh, the dreaded
AI.
AI.
Oh man, this is amazing. Oh, my message is too long. Send in shorter messages. All right, let's do one. It gave me a list of 10 books to look at. So let me put those here. Gotta love AI. My message is still too long. Okay. This is not friendly of you, Mr. AI. You're supposed to make this easy for me. Okay. I'm going to download this. There we go. Download as a Word document. Okay. And then move it into the meeting. There we go. Okay. That should be the list of resources from AI. It didn't include the book that you talked about, John. Could you put in that woman's name, Rachel Loudon,
Rachel
again?
Loudon, I'll type it here, RachelLauden, and it was Cuisine and Empire from 2013. Whoops. Empire. It was published by University of California.
Okay.
So, and have you put in some? Oh, there you are.
I put in, yeah, I just opened the document myself and it looks like they didn't use the returns. So it's just one huge paragraph. But I think if you can easily just go in and put in the returns. So when book 2 starts, just put a hard stop, etc. Book 3, book 4, put a hard stop after each one, and then you'll have a list. And I'm sorry,
Okay.
AI didn't format it nicely. Let's see here. Jerry is thanking you for your presentation. Right. Anyone else have any questions for John? Oh, and we need to get to our next session. I just realized we're running out of time. Okay,
Yeah,
well, John, thank
I
you.
went on too long. Sorry, Eric. My
No,
apologies.
no, fascinating stuff and very, very much worth the time. So thank you very much, John. We appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, well, to everyone else, we are going to be starting our next session in about 8 minutes. So please move over into the next Zoom link and we will see you there. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Eric.